What's up, guys? It's Hunter Sitchy from CheckShovePoker.com. I apologize for the lack of new content as of late. Basically, I've been grinding 12 hours a day for the last 2 weeks at Borgata, and now I'm happy to say that I'm back in sunshiny South Florida, surrounded by beautiful women and terrible poker players. And now I'd like to share a very pertinent hand history that was sent to me by one of my students via email. This was in his local 1-2 game. Stacks are usually pretty deep, and the hand history starts out with four very loose passive players limping into the pot, followed by a very loose aggressive hijack making a big isolation raise to $18. At this point, my student wakes up with kings in the cutoff, and he 3-bets to $55. He asked me if I like that sizing. I love it because it's $1 greater than a 3x 3-bet. And I'm pretty much always going to assume that the hijack is going to be over defending in the spot, especially in a 1-2 game. So it ends up folding all the way around to the hijack, who calls as expected, and then go heads up to a flop of ace of spades, 5 of diamonds, 3 of diamonds, and the hijack checks. Now my student asked me if I would c-bet with kings on this board, and I think the answer is no, because I don't think betting accomplishes much. I don't think the hijack is ever going to fold a better hand, and I think he's very rarely going to call with a worse hand. The number of ace-x combos in his range greatly outnumber the combos of mid pairs like queens, jacks, and tens in his range. And the other thing to consider is that you don't have to defend against overcards on this board. So I prefer to check back and allow the hijack to make a mistake on the turn. And I think this is a very important concept in every poker variant. You're usually trying to take the line that is most likely to induce your opponent to make a mistake. And if it means allowing him to make a mistake on a later street, by all means, check back. My student also asked me how I would structure my c-betting range on this board. And my c-betting range is going to depend very heavily on how often I think the hijack is defending against my 3-bets. So if I think he's defending close to 100% of the time, I'm going to be using a depolarized 3-betting range, which would mean that I would be c-betting with hands like ace king and ace queen for value on this board, and then following through with hands like queen jack because of their blocker value. Having a queen in your hand makes it 25% less likely that the hijack has ace queen on this board, and the jack makes it 25% less likely that the hijack has ace jack on this board, and it makes it a lot more likely that he has a hand like pocket tens. If I think that the hijack is defending against 3-bets at a more appropriate frequency, I'm going to be using a much more polarized range, which would mean that I would be c-betting this board with ace king and ace queen for value most of the time, and I'd be checking back with top set to defend against blank turns and rivers. I would also be checking back with random ace deuce and ace 4 suited combos to protect my range against turn stabs, because I'm going to be checking back with hands like queens, jacks, and tens for the reasons that I already listed. I'm also going to have some random 7-6 of spades hands or 8-7 of diamond hands that I would like to follow through to balance out my range. I think a lot of people 3-bet way too tight in spots like this, and then they c-bet big with ace king, and they don't have any hands in their range to bluff with, and they wonder why people check fold ace 10 of hearts to them on this board. It's because they're just way off balance. So I'm happy to say that my student checked back, and the turn was the 10 of hearts, the hijack checked, and my student asked me if I would value bet in this spot. I think this is a slam dunk value bet in smaller stakes games, and I think that this is a terrible value bet in bigger games, and it's because the hijack is much more likely to defend against your 3-bet with 10x in a smaller stakes game, and I think he's a lot more likely to 4-bet or fold in a bigger game with 10 in his hand. So in this spot, if the hijack is over defending, I think he has a lot of king 10, queen 10, jack 10, 10, 9 suited combos along with queens and jacks that will probably check call the turn, and I think it's much less likely that he has an ace-x combo. I think people in smaller stakes games probably lead with most ace-x combos on this turn, which may or may not be correct. Okay, so my student ends up betting roughly half the pot. I love that sizing and the hijack check calls. So far, so good. Now, the river is the queen of hearts, and the hijack decided to do something very unorthodox. He just let out for 200, and my student said he went into the tank. I'm not sure why, because if you consider the range of hands that the hijack would isolate with and then call a 3-bet, check the flop, check call the turn, and lead big on the river, you realize that there aren't very many combos that he can be bluffing with, especially since my student had the king of diamonds in his hand. This is where blockers are huge, because I think the majority of the hijack's range consists of ace, queen, ace 10, and queen 10 on this river. I think he could occasionally have top set if he decided to slow play because he thought that my student was 3-betting way too much. I think he could also have queens or 10s. The problem is that he can also have queen 10. And then hands that he could bluff with, there aren't many, because he can't have king 9 of diamonds on this board. And he can't have very many small suited connected hands like 9-8 of diamonds, 8-7 of diamonds, 7-6 of diamonds. I think he'd probably check raise with those on the turn some of the time. And even if he isn't, the number of those combos is very small in comparison to the Broadway combos that he has in his range. At the same time, you have to consider how my student's range is perceived by the hijack. My student's range smashes this board, and I think it's very unlikely that the hijack would ever lead with error as a result of that. So my student ended up folding, and I think that's great hand reading on his part, and I'm just glad to see that his post-flop skills are developing as a result of my coaching and his hard work off the table. So I'm glad I was able to share this hand history with you guys. I hope you guys learned something. Again, my name is Hunter Sitchy, and I am coaching for CheckShowPoker.com. Make sure you guys run good, have fun, and constantly look for ways to improve.